Okay, I think we should start. Yeah, should we start? Okay, so we'll start with introductions. I'll just go round just in a sentence, starting with Tash. I'll just go as people appear on my screen.
Well, hey everyone, I'm Tash. I work at OnePlanet, mainly on the Young Leaders Programme at the moment around COP28, which some of you are in, and also nature-based projects, including with the South Downs National Park and the local nature recovery strategy for Sussex. And I'm doing a little bit on sport as well.
Right, Stuart.
Go. Hi, I'm Stu, and I have been working on a plan on OnePlanet as a community plan, which is for homeless service providers and for people that find themselves street homeless. So connecting the dots of where the services can be better utilised, where there's gaps and where there's overlaps. I'm also a host of Construction Cash Flow podcast. So we're very keen in the construction industry to convert to a more sustainable way of doing things. So it's very interesting for that perspective from me.
Great. Sawal, where do you go?
Yes, my name is Sawal. I just graduated in Environment, Politics and Development from SOAS, and I'm part of the Young Leaders Program. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sawal. And Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm from Horsham in West Sussex, and I'm working with churches to see how we can utilise OnePlanet. We've already plotted some eco churches in our area, and we're hoping to roll it out across the country. And we're working with our district council who are already using OnePlanet.
Fantastic. Ryan?
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm currently working on the Young Leaders Programme as well. I've just finished mapping the Ashford District Council map. And I also hold a master's in mechanical engineering.
Fantastic. And Ryan is our superhero at the moment. I think getting the first local government plan mapped and checked by the team. So yeah, well done, Ryan.
Thank you.
And Beata?
Yeah, hi, I'm Beata. I've just finished my MSc in Environmental Technology from Imperial, also on the Young Leaders Programme, and currently mapping Islington, hopefully going to form an Imperial team to work on Kensington and Chelsea, the Imperial Borough, soon as well.
Fantastic. George?
Yeah, hiya. I'm a little bit different here, I guess. So ESG is my day job, and I've been seeing kind of OnePlanet a bit everywhere at the moment, all over my feeds. And I saw about the young leaders thing, and I tried to come to the first training session, didn't quite make it. So I thought I'd come to this and see if I can find out a bit more about what's going on.
Okay, great. And George, Tash can give you a bit more background if you want at any point. But you're with Gleeds, is that right?
Yeah, I'm with Gleeds. I think you, Poran, we've worked together in the past, and I kind of heard about it through there as well. So it'd be great to see if we can kind of get any collaborations going.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And I will be meeting up with Richard Steer towards the end of the month. So
great.
That would be great. Fantastic. Thanks, George, for joining. Rubaiyat?
Is it Arif?
Is it? Yeah, sorry, have I got your...
It's just, I also had spoke with Arif today. So.
Okay. Arif, is it the name? Yeah.
Out and about.
If we'll give you okay. We'll let Arif speak a bit later. And Elle. Oh, something's gone. Oh, we've got another person. Elle, can you give a quick intro?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening as it is. I'm here in wet, windy Sussex. I am looking forward to listening in and hearing the dialogue about how we move forward with OnePlanet Living. Nice to see you all.
Great, thanks, Elle. And Biplav, is that right?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Biplav Pagani. I'm the climate change officer at Haringey Council. And just join in to listen in.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Biplav, for joining in. So, of course, I've known Joe Baker for years, actually. So it's absolutely fantastic to be working with
no.
Harry Council.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Arif.
Hi, this is Zubair. I'm a student of Hartford University, so I'm interested about this sustainability and the climate change. I have studied about that, so I'm interested about to join this section. And yesterday I also joined this, so that was a fantastic event, and now I have to join and work with his body.
Okay, thanks, Arif. We didn't hear that too well, but I think we get the general, the idea. Actually, Arif is at Hertfordshire University, so that's great. Just very quickly, if I'm going to cover very briefly the history of OnePlanet, some of the thinking behind it. There'll be an opportunity to discuss more, particularly how different professions can contribute to the bigger picture. But is there anything anyone really wants to get from this? Is there something you'd really like to get from this in particular? Just put your hand up or call out.
Quite interested to find out the philosophy in terms of the creative thinking, the right side of brain, because it's a question that comes up when I kind of discuss the platform. And I think it's something that differentiates it from usual kind of networking systems. And it's really be nice to get that encapsulated, and how we describe that to somebody who hasn't come across it before.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's have a chat about that. So we'll definitely cover that. Anything else anyone particularly wants to cover? No. Otherwise, we'll just go through. And any time during when I'm presenting, just don't hesitate to just say, Purin, stop a sec. What do you mean by that? Or can I ask this question? So, host disabled screen sharing somehow. Can you allow me to share screens?
That should be it now.
Okay, let's try that. I'm just going to close that now.
We're not used to Zoom. That's what this is.
Okay, I'm going to try sharing this and see if that works.
Yeah.
Can you see that? Okay, great. I just need to move you, and I need to get the. Where's my? I got the taskbar at the bottom, so I can't put it on. Oh, let's see.
Do you want it on presenter view?
No, I should be all right if I just get this here. I think it's this. Just give me a sec. Okay, so that should work. Okay, great. Just got hooked up just a light by the side of my computer. So great. Everyone can see that now, yeah, and hear and everything, yeah. So, I usually frame this in terms of a new reality, thinking and new tools, and in this case, I'll give you a brief history of OnePlanet and the thinking underpinning the platform. But some of you will have heard this before. But for me, so my name's Purin Desai. I have been in sustainability for about 35 years. And after those 35 years, I think the thing I've really learned at the core of it is that sustainability is just understanding that everything is interconnected. So how we build our homes determines how much we use our cars. If those are internal combustion engine cars, they're creating pollutants which are damaging our health, contributing to climate change, supporting the oil industry, which also creates single-use plastics, which end up in the oceans, filling our fish up with plastics if we choose to eat those fish. We fill ourselves up with more microplastics. So, for example, probably now every cell in our body has microplastics in it. It's even crossing into fetuses as well, across the placenta. So it's unlikely that's not going to have an impact on our health. So, but it's also killing penguins. Those plastics are also killing penguins on the other side of the world. So everything is interconnected, but we don't have the tools to visualize those connections or manage those connections. Does that sound okay so far to everyone? Just call out if you want to ask any questions. So it is built on, well, almost 35 years of sustainability experience. So my background's actually in neuroscience and medical sciences, but I co-founded an environmental organization called Bioregional in the early 1990s. With colleagues, set up a couple of sustainable forestry businesses, a couple of organic farms, a couple of recycling businesses, needed new offices. So to cut a long story short, ended up building probably the world's first zero carbon urban village called Bedzed in South London, 100 homes, 20,000 square feet or 2,000 square meters of commercial and community space. You'll see that picture in the top left. We completed that in 2002 in partnership with the Peabody Trust. And I lived there and worked there for 18 years. And absolutely fantastic experience, and really only living there and working there, really gave us that full sort of total lived experience, which I think it's like to, it's called today. And it enabled me to coin the term One Planet Living. How can we lead happy, healthy lives within the environmental resources available on our one planet? And if we all live like Europeans, we'd need 3-4 planets worth of resources. If we all live like Americans, we'd need 5 planets worth of resources. So it was a very easy way of communicating to people. Okay, we've only got one planet. That becomes a very clear challenge. And then I led a process to identify 10 simple, intuitive guiding principles to help anybody across any sector, any organization, any individual create a coherent joined up sustainability plan for themselves or their organizations or their projects. And that went from health and happiness, equity and local economy, through to zero waste and zero carbon energy. So none of this is rocket science. We just pulled it together in a very simple way of communicating it. And I can't stress how important it is that if we get our communications simple and clear, that we can really start engaging people. And then I led the One Planet Living initiative for 18 years, and we applied it across all sectors all around the world. So, for example, we used it with manufacturing companies, we used it with retailers like B&Q. So, for example, we worked with B&Q on their One Planet Home strategy. We used it with cities. I particularly led on the projects working with real estate developers. So we put in sustainability strategies for about $30 billion of zero carbon development. About $15 billion of US dollars of that has got built out already in over 30 countries, everything from tiny homes in Australia, a new quarter of city in the Middle East, Masdar city. I raised more finance with colleagues, and we built out another 250 units of development, including One Brighton, which is the apartment building in the center there, which is 172 apartments, basically passive house standards with its own community energy services company running on renewables, supplying renewable energy less than the price of brown energy, and completely private car free. And I still think it's the largest private car free development in the UK. And actually, and that was in joint venture with Crest Nicholson PLC, so one of our top house builders. But also landscape scale projects across Africa, conservation development projects. But my favorite project is actually at the bottom there, Disneyland or Village Nature, which is the extension to Disneyland Paris. So this was a 15-year engagement for us. Euro Disney and their joint venture partner Pierre Vacances came to see us at Bedzed and said, "Oh, we're conceiving a new resort. We want to make it a One Planet resort. Can you help us?" And so we started working with them with Disney Imagineering, for example, to create a One Planet experience. And it opened in 2017. So it's Europe's largest swimming complex, all geothermally heated. So we had to drill down 2 kilometers to get the geothermal energy. So now you can swim all year round in Northern Europe in 27-degree temperature water. Absolutely lovely. Went on a family holiday when it opened. But it's in we're generating so much geothermal energy, we're exporting it to the main Disneyland complex to reduce its carbon footprint and reduce the amount of gas boilers there. But it's 1,000 holiday apartments all run on renewable energy, a rewilded landscape. So there are more species after development than before development, protected species. And also there's food growing on site. So it's a whole experience of humans in harmony with the rest of nature. And it's absolutely fantastic. If you want to go on a holiday, I couldn't recommend it more. We also wrote the sustainability strategy for the London 2012 Olympics, which was called the OnePlanet Games. And I can't take credit for this, but my ex-wife and a couple of colleagues held the first workshop at the United Nations in partnership with the Colombian government in 2011 to propose what became the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted by all UN member states unanimously. And I understand it's the only time the UN has unanimously agreed on anything. To adopt these as the global goals, 17 sustainable development goals. So I'm just very proud, that I created the framework on which the SDGs are based and which all UN member states were able to agree to. And I think that was because we had a very simple story to tell. So we didn't make it complicated. It was absolutely the simplest, most elegant story we could tell, which was completely in line with what we knew from the science, for example. So, communication is as important as of course, any data or any science, so the storytelling around it, which we can talk about later as well. But the new reality is that we're crossing climate tipping points. So over the last 3 years, we have really got signals that things are changing much more quickly than we thought. And the thing which really brought it home for me was in 2020, when in British Columbia, if you may recall, all of a sudden it was 5 degrees hotter than ever recorded in British Columbia, and we had those fires there. And that first time I heard of a heat dome, I know some of the scientists very well, and so Professor Sir David King, I was chatting to him, and he said, "Yeah, look, things really are tipping. This is off the scales." Professor Sir David King was our UK Chief Scientific Officer. So we are creating. This is the new reality. We're crossing these climate tipping points. So. Many people are now talking about it's too late for transition and we have to change much more rapidly. So we need to talk about transformation now rather than transition. But what's the new thinking which needs to underpin that transformation? And really, I think today we are tearing our hair out trying to solve issues in silos. So we try and, for example, solve the cost of living crisis in a way which just makes the climate emergency worse. And when I'm feeling a bit cynical, I just think whoever shouts loudest this month gets a policy to keep them quiet. And there is absolutely no reason for those policies to be joined up. And it's a mistake to think that we can solve issues in silos. We can't solve an economic issue without looking at a climate issue, without looking at a health issue. So we need now to, if we can, take a deep breath, just look at, okay, what are the outcomes we want to achieve? How do those fit together? And then can we collaborate across traditional silos of different sectors, public sector, private sector, voluntary sector, different organizations. We often work in the silos of our organizations, or even different departments within the same organization can often be working in the silos and not be joined up. So instead of that, can we create ecosystems of actors across all the actors, breaking down those traditional silos and start focusing on these joined up shared outcomes. Does that make sense so far? Yeah, so I've got a few nods there. Don't hesitate to interrupt me at any point. And I love this. So I guess this is, again, it's not rocket science. And a lot of people, talk about systems thinking. And it can get very complex particularly when academics talk about systems thinking and systems change and systems design and all sorts of great long articles about how systems thinking works, how it doesn't work, which is all good, but it doesn't make it accessible to just ordinary people doing their day-to-day jobs. And I love this quote from Buckminster Fuller, great architect, thinker from the 1960s and 70s, who invented things like the geodesic domes, like at the Eden Centre, and immortalized in things like buckyballs, these the carbon nanotubes and balls and things like that. But I love his quote here: if you want to teach someone a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them the tool which will lead them to new ways of thinking. So that's really how we've ended up building the OnePlanet platform. We're helping, we believe it's the only intuitive tool at the moment which can help people in their day-to-day lives embed systems thinking without having to think about it as systems thinking. So I think all of you here will know about the new tool, but enables us to see the link, connect plans, and collaborate in ecosystems on shared outcomes and shared indicators. So I won't go through that, and we've got free training courses which you can sign up to. And it's being used across all sectors, and those sectors are starting to connect together. So yeah, I mean, it's been the hardest thing I've ever done, getting into this. It's to get to this, I think we've gone quite deep into the very core of how we organize data, and I'll say a bit more about that, and how actually we don't organize data in a very, very helpful way to solve these complex interconnected problems at the moment. But yeah, and it also enables collaboration. So a really simple, even coming down to outcomes, actions, indicators, just creating that common language. So any project, any plan, any policy can be broken down into its atomic structure of these OAIs. And then we can connect any plan, project, policy, strategy to any other plan, policy, strategy or project. So it enables that collaboration in a way that people can really understand, drawing out the shared outcomes and the shared indicators, which people might want, see how those shared outcomes, shared indicators can link together into a coherent whole, and help people be freed from the silos they're working in to collaborate. And in fact, that's we're just starting to prove how powerful that might be. And over the course of the next year, we really want to roll that out, not least with our young leaders, mapping the climate strategies, and then we'll start working on linking those, for example, to health strategies, to transport strategies, to all of the different strategies, and start looking at that. We are doing some work with some leading parliamentarians, including Lord McNichol, who was former Labour Party General Secretary, people like Theresa May, of course, our former Prime Minister, Caroline Lucas MP, Kirsty Blackman, leading SNP politician. We're looking at making a call for something like an office for joined up government, to say, just as we've got an office for budget responsibility, so that there's a sort of semi-independent way of checking whether any budget is likely to work in practice, we want to make a call and get their support for an office for joined up government, or at least to get more joined up government. Ideally using our platform to do that. And we've got some events coming up on the 12th of December, our online events around COP, but also Lord McNichol is organising a day for us to be in the House of Commons in January or early February, where our young leaders can come with their recommendations, and then any MP can drop in and start talking to the young leaders about what they need. And we're looking at getting cross-party support to say, look, we all need to work together to allow the future these young leaders know we need in order for them to have a good life. So we really want to get that cross-party support. And actually, when you start looking at the interconnectedness of things and the connections, actually 80% of the time, we agree on 80% of things. So we don't have tools to show that actually we agree on most things. while things like social media actually tend to drive the differences between us rather than drive the commonalities between us. So I think there is something there. But my background is in neuroscience, and I've been very lucky to come across the work of Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who wrote a book 12 years ago called The Master and His Emissary, but just earlier this year, he published the update to that called The Matter with Things. And many people, including me, think he is the greatest intellect of our time. So do look him up, Ian McGilchrist. And many, including me, think he's going to be as important as Charles Darwin in defining a paradigm. And this is because we can't separate how we see the world from the way our brain works. And our brain works, the two halves of our brain, this is a simplification, but a very, at its core is absolutely true and exquisitely evidenced in huge amounts of detail in his 1,760-page book, The Matter with Things. I'm 200 pages in on that, but yeah, I've listened to lots of his lectures online, and I highly recommend them. It takes a bit of time to get into, but the two halves of our brain focus, or he says he describes it as attend to reality in two very different ways. So the left hemisphere really focuses on the detail. So in evolutionary terms, whenever a neural network has arisen in nature, it's always been divided into two. So it's something really fundamental. And the left hemisphere focuses on the detail. So it's, for example, when a bird is trying to catch a worm, it has to focus on the detail. Now, we think of focus as a very positive thing. But in fact, in the brain, that mainly is about stopping other information reaching consciousness, reaching our attention, so that we can focus by actually ignoring other stuff. And we can take that further into sort of metaphysics, if you like, or where actually focusing is ignoring things, is ignorance of other things, and it's actually the root of ignorance. So the left hemisphere, although it can focus on the detail, and that's what we do mostly in our culture, we focus on the detail, it absolutely can't see the big picture. So it might, for example, know what a head is, what a leg is, what an arm is, but it cannot put them together. So it might stick the, someone has a stroke, so you can, in the right hemisphere, so you're only operating on the left hemisphere, you might not be able to take the different parts of the body in a jigsaw or something and put them together properly. And it's not connected to reality. So it works with words and it works with numbers. But we have to recognize words and numbers are representations of reality. They are not reality itself. Okay, so we don't understand in our culture that actually what we can talk about, what we can manipulate in numbers is not reality. It's a representation of reality. It's a model of reality, and all models are limited. Okay, so the right hemisphere, on the other hand, can see the big picture. So, for example, this might be the bird looking out for a hawk or a mate or something like that. So, in most basic of evolutionary terms, we can think of the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere being eat, catch the worm, without being eaten, keep a lookout for the hawk. So there are. So the right hemisphere allows huge amounts of information to be attended to at the same time. So it sees the big picture. Because it sees the big picture, it's always less certain than the left hemisphere. So the left hemisphere knows its little bits, and it thinks, it becomes overconfident. It thinks if it knows that bit of detail, it can manipulate the whole world. And in fact, the left hemisphere controls the right hand usually, and it's about grabbing. It's like grabbing a worm. It's also about grabbing, and probably associated with things like colonialism. Let's grab that bit of land over there in that other country. So really interesting the way we attend to reality with the two hemispheres determines the way we think. So the left hemisphere is fundamentally more intelligent. So you can anesthetize the two halves of the brain, ask it the same question, and invariably the right hemisphere will answer it more intelligently. So for example, the left hemisphere cannot understand the context of a sentence. So it cannot understand irony, it cannot understand sarcasm, okay? Where the very same words, if you don't understand the context, actually means the exact opposite. So the left hemisphere, by seeing the right hemisphere, by seeing the bigger picture, understands context, understands actually when you say that, you mean the exact opposite of the words might mean themselves literally. And it's more connected to reality. It has more of the so-called afferent nerves. So it's got more of the information coming from our senses to give that whole big picture view. And Western culture over the last 300 years has become very focused on the left hemisphere. It thinks the more we know about the detail, the more we can understand about the big picture. But that is a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. And that misunderstanding is that reality is made up of separate parts. If we manage those separate parts, we can manage the whole. In fact, reality is much more interconnected than that. And it's, in fact, not even made up of parts. It's a continuum with features in those parts, but I can talk about that. The left hemisphere also tends to see things. And again, we know actually things are, to some extent, we can think about things as actually illusions because they are really processes, okay, or patterns which are temporary. Nothing lasts forever. It's a temporary pattern. And it's very hard, actually, when you look at it, to define the edges of things. Particularly, when you go subatomic, whatever, as you go closer and closer into the detail, actually things just disappear. So we know that. From particle physics or quantum physics, but that core understanding of reality, which scientists have, which physicists have, has not translated into our culture of understanding how reality works. But that understanding still is far more, has been in all cultures, but it's more archetypically a core part of Eastern cultures and in indigenous cultures. So I just want to open this up a bit more. I'm just wondering how I'm doing on time. Has someone got the time? I just can't see my clock at the moment. Can someone just tell me the time?
25 to 7.
25 to 7. Okay, good. So I'll just want actually to open it, well, for any questions, if people have questions now. Otherwise, I'd like to ask some quite challenging questions of you, which might challenge your basic assumptions that we make on how we, how we deal with the world and make plans, for example. But does anyone have any questions so far? No? Okay. So I'm going to open this up and I'd like
one,
yeah.
So I would consider myself very conditioned to left-sided brain thinking.
Yeah.
And I suppose many people in the West, as you've been saying, are like that.
Yeah.
In the way that our culture is. How would we, how would somebody start to open up their right side of brain so they see the big picture better?
Yeah, so there are all sorts of ways, and it is just our training, and actually we can train our right hemisphere more, but of course art, dance helps that, but also things like mind mapping. So the sorts of tools we've got, I think, unlocks that right hemisphere where you can see the big picture, you can see interconnectedness. Basically, it's helping people see interconnectedness, become more in touch with reality, which is actually through our senses and our understanding of the big picture. So that's why actually art, dance, all those sorts of processes, yoga, all those sorts of activities actually strengthen the right hemisphere. And we shouldn't undervalue those as actually we should value them as actually putting us more in touch with reality than anything we can do intellectually. So some questions to ask here. Because these are the sort of things we've got into talking about in society, but well, I think are massively problematic. So I want to say, look, I just want to ask you this, to what extent can we be data-led? Does anyone want to have a go at this? And don't worry, I won't have a go at you if you want to defend data-led decision-making, for example. Or what are the limitations of it? That's not to say it isn't useful, but yeah, to what extent can we be data-led, in fact?
Ron, shall I?
Yeah.
May I go?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. So I think data is often a snapshot, it's a point in time. And as you've said before, things change, circumstances change, context, qualification around how that data has been assimilated. There's always flaws and holes in the data. I think currently, my opinion is that using data can help give us a broad brush status, kind of a roadmap sense check. Are we going in the right direction with this thing? Using what we know in our comfort structure. And I wonder, my question back to you would be, if the majority of our systems, our thinking, our left brain operation is in that field and the reliance on data, what shall we do to build that rapid transition out of that way of thinking in order to build the accelerated transformation that we need to increase environmental sustainability?
I think that's a good question, Elle, and a good challenge. But yeah, and I'll come. We'll come to that. Yeah, and perhaps if anyone else has any other points on this, then I'll sort of wrap up a response based on what else I said. Yeah,
just a quick one. So in the marketing field, if you like, it's becoming more and more reliant on data, on stats, but that doesn't actually sell products, if you like. We seem to be sitting behind stats all the time and not getting any new customers. But what does get new customers is stories. So it was interesting that you mentioned about the arts, the dance, art, yoga, and I think perhaps stories fit into that. And we tend to have this innate interested in stories, but we don't really have an interest in data. So that's kind of an interesting observation.
Yeah, Stuart, I think, yeah, absolutely right. And I think where I come on data, Elle, coming back to you is, we can never make decisions, or we never make decisions on the basis of data, and we can never make decisions on the basis of data. Now I'm pushing it really hard the other way, and of course data can be useful, but we always make decisions on the basis of our values. So, okay, we can collect data on carbon emissions, but we have to understand what's our relationship to what's our values which underpin why we want to reduce carbon emissions. We make the decisions on the basis of what we value and what we don't value. And in fact, what we value and what we don't value is dependent on our hopes and fears. So, for example, the climate assemblies, which have been very successful, don't focus on the data, because people will give you different data and they will argue. And when you're stuck in the left hemisphere, there's nothing that will prove you wrong. You just get your own data. And all data is a subset of reality. Okay. And so what I say is, and my personal mission is to free people trapped in their Excel spreadsheets. Because actually, when you are stuck in your Excel spreadsheet, you think you are managing the world. You think you're understanding the world. But as important as what's in your Excel spreadsheet, you need to be aware what's not in your Excel spreadsheet. And that's like the vast majority of reality. So you are never dealing with reality when you're dealing with your Excel spreadsheet. And so no wonder we can't manage reality with everyone in their separate Excel spreadsheets. So we can never be data-led. We have to understand our values, and our values are based on our hopes and fears. And what the climate assemblies do so effectively is to say, okay, what are our values, and then and really focus on our hopes and fears. And then we find that actually most of us have the same hopes and the same fears. And then we can have a good discussion about our values, and then we can have a good discussion about the data and the information to support us making better decisions in line with our values and which align with our hopes and which reduce our fears. So we can never be data-led. So anyone who says we are data-led, I think you haven't taken the first step towards understanding how you make decisions and how we can make decisions.
And how, quick one if I might, if there's time,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
When we look at data from example like the Stockholm Resilience Centre,
yeah,
and we understand that visual representation of that data from planetary boundaries perspective, that to me is good data that allows us to then, to your point, go into the discussion of hopes and fears. But do you think it's true to say that if we hadn't had that data in that format from that forum, we might not be having some of the conversations we're having now?
I would say you can make better decisions without data than you can make with data. But absolutely, if we were in contact with reality, like a lot of indigenous communities, you don't need the data to work in harmony with nature. You do not need those data. And those data, and they're changing, and they're realizing, just the interconnectedness between those different planetary boundaries. And the scientists have got it wrong in terms of the living system's response to things like carbon. They're much, much more sensitive. So when they were giving us 100 years or 200 years, then 100 years, 30 years now, they're saying we're basically run out of time.
Yeah.
And that was because of a fundamental misunderstanding about the interconnectedness, which underpins reality and particularly underpins living systems. So science can be good, but absolutely, when it's reductionist, stuck in its silos, it is as much a danger as it is a potential savior for us. So I come from medical sciences. I'm just going to quickly ask this. What percentage of NHS spending could be avoided if we had healthy diets, healthy lifestyles, and a clean environment? If you know this answer, please keep quiet until other people have a chance. I just want to, can I have a couple of people shout out?
70%.
70. Good one, Karen. Anyone else want to?
50.
50. Okay, one more, and then
I'll go 80. Go on then.
80. Okay, spot on. It's about 80%. Okay, so we cannot claim to be a data-driven, scientifically driven society when we spend 3% of NHS budgets on promoting health and 97% on treating disease. So absolutely, we are not data-driven. We just choose the data which is a subset of the whole, which suits a particular story. And that particular story is heroic NHS, which they are in many ways, but actually, as in The Art of War, the Chinese book, the really clever leader avoids any need for courage and any need for heroism. So we are not a data-driven. We choose data which suits the stories that we tell ourselves. So can we be data-led? I'm conscious of time. And just very quickly now on this as well, to what extent can we use evidence-based decision-making? Just anyone want to have a go at evidence-based decision-making before I do?
Just offer this. Sorry, go ahead. You go, please. You go.
Oh, I was just going to say that perhaps when you're thinking about differences in cultural viewpoints, going to a scientific evidence might be somewhat of a neutral point to agree upon. So at a sort of international level, it could be, I think there's value in it, but
so
yeah, go on.
Yeah, no. Thanks, Tash. So I don't think we should ignore evidence. And I'd love to talk about this more. I'm conscious of time. I should have, and I can't see the time. So but for me, yeah, again, so if you are using evidence-based decision making, you are always looking in the rear view mirror. You're trying to drive looking in the rear view mirror. Evidence is always from the past. You cannot create the future based on evidence. Okay. Now, it could be in line with evidence, but absolutely you cannot create the future on the basis of evidence. And so we have to take evidence into account, but the possibilities for the future are beyond what we can see in the evidence in the past. So again, I don't want to completely, just as data is useful, evidence is useful, but absolutely anyone who says I'm into evidence-based decision-making, I think you're not opening up the greatest opportunities we have for transformation, which are beyond the evidence of the past. So just another point to think. Another thing, which this is the most, the one I hate the most. If we can't measure it, we can't manage it. Standard management, sort of assumption here, or misunderstanding. What's the problem with if we can't measure it, we can't manage it? Do you think, why do I have a problem with this one?
I would say plenty of things aren't measurable, and also measuring it isn't necessarily doing it.
Yeah.
Measuring is not necessarily representative of the thing. It's just how we perceive it.
I wonder if it depends on the metrics that you choose to measure. So for example, if you're measuring satisfaction, happiness, health, well-being, those are metrics based again on what you were talking about, values. And how we measure those would be very different, let's say, from how the metrics that we choose to measure something else. I think the concept would be that one set of metrics does not apply to all things that you're trying to assess. That would be the way I kind of look at it.
Yeah. So I think both you and Tash have covered the bases. One is not everything important you can measure, or easily measure, or indeed, just like if you, can you really measure love or happiness? You can get some sort of insight into it, but you can't measure it accurately in that sense. So the most important things in life you can't measure. So we then exclude them from our models and our decision making. And the other thing is absolutely, it depends what you choose to measure, which depends what you end up managing. So we have to be careful about selecting what we might choose to measure and manage. And very different from measurement and manage, or very different from management, I think, is the concept of nurturing. And we can nurture complex systems. We can't manage them. We cannot manage living systems. They have a mind of their own. We can nurture living systems. So just like a kid, or a child, do you want to manage that child, or do you want to nurture that child? We are enslaved by people who say, who have become dominant with their left hemisphere, less intelligent part of their brain, and tell us we have to measure everything and try and manage it. It's just a fundamentally less intelligent way of understanding reality, or a misunderstanding of reality. So, last point, does understanding the detail mean you understand the whole? Sorry, I haven't typed that out properly.
If it depends on, again, it depends. In isolation, one data set will not allow you to see the whole. We go back to your original point about the context and the metrics or the measures or the indicators that are being applied. Because as we've discovered, the connectedness of everything perhaps can't always be measured.
Yeah. I think you're getting the idea on this. Does anyone else? We've had a conversation, but does anyone else, Beata, Ryan, Sawal, anyone else want to just chip in here? Is this challenging, or do you agree with what I'm saying? Is this obvious, or does it just sound mad?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what you're saying. I think it's interesting how deeply ingrained some of these siloed principles are just within our system. If you look, for instance, even at the education system, we choose 3 subjects at 16, and then the amount of people that go and study PhDs and that become experts in a certain topic, especially, I guess you can see that in the medical sciences, people spend 3 years studying one subsect of one protein of one massive system, and then they are considered an expert, which in some way they are.
Yeah.
But I think understanding where you and your work falls within the bigger picture is obviously very important.
Yeah. Thanks, Beata. Sawal?
Yeah, so during my course of political ecology, we had a class on relational ontology.
Yeah.
And in the lecture, we understood that basically every community or every individual has their own ontology through which they see the world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be, of course, data driven. And as you mentioned, the ontology of the indigenous communities worldwide, how they react to knowledge and what their perception of quote unquote scientific knowledge is sometimes way more accurate than what scientists can predict.
Yeah.
And of course, there do exist externalities which with whatever data that we collect. And
Correct.
data often fails to capture those externalities. So hence, yeah, I do agree with you. But then can we completely divorce with data, or do we have to take a path where we somehow integrate data and our collective intuition?
Sawal, I think that's a great question, Beata, as well on that. Look, so for me, the misunderstanding is that the world is made up of parts, and if you manage those parts, you can manage the whole. It's much more complex than that. Things, when you change one, if you try and manage, or if you interact with one part of the system, the whole system changes. It's not made up of separate parts. So understanding more of the detail does not necessarily give you a better way of understanding the whole. So particularly if you try and use that information to try and manage that system. Again, it's just understanding this interconnectedness. So the question for me becomes, how do we want to live? What are our hopes and fears? What are our values? What can we agree on? How do we want to live? And then we can use data, evidence, understanding the detail to support that. We can't do it the other way. We can't go bottom up. We have to go top down in the hierarchy, as I put it. We cannot go from the detail to the whole. We have to go from the whole to the detail, and then back to the whole, actually. So as Ian McGilchrist said, really the ideal flow of information is right hemisphere, see the big picture, left hemisphere, see the detail. Whatever comes out of the detail, put it back to the right hemisphere. Don't let the left hemisphere assume it knows what to do with that bit of focused information. Give it back to the right hemisphere, put it back in context, and get more understanding of the big picture by understanding the detail, but the context of that detail. Does that make sense? So always, ultimately, the right hemisphere, that's why he calls his book The Master and His Emissary, emissary being servant. The right hemisphere, the big picture must be the master, and the detail must be the servant. And that has become completely topsy-turvy in our culture. So I will move, I'm conscious of time, I'll move on. I'm very happy to stay on a bit. Can someone give me just a quick time check?
5 to 7.
Sorry, it's?
5 to 7.
5 to 7, okay. I'll just run through a couple of things and then I will stay on for a few more minutes if anyone wants to stay on for a few minutes. So interconnectedness, as I said, it's actually an understanding of this is in all cultures, but probably the clearest expressions of it are in Eastern culture, particularly Taoism and Hinduism. So, for example, I've got an image there of Indra's net. So Indra was is a supreme deity in Hindu mythology. He was god of the weather, amongst other things. But I've always been fascinated by this image since I was a teenager, which is of Indra's net. So Indra's palace was said to be hung with a network of jewels, with every jewel reflecting every other jewel, representing the interconnectedness of things. You know, so it's the same as you might see, say, in a spider's web with dew on it in the morning, where actually everything is interconnected, interpenetrating with everything else. You change any one small part of that system and the whole system is different. And that's a really beautiful artistic way of communicating actually how the nature of ultimate reality, that everything is interdependent, interpenetrating. And, you know, of course, it can be, we can see it in parts, but actually beyond those parts is a completely indivisible whole, which you cannot even talk about or you cannot even contain in numbers, because it goes beyond words and numbers. So it sounds strange, but actually when you, if you just take a bit of time to study and think about it, it becomes absolutely obvious. And this whole idea as well is that when you look at the parts, it ends up very complicated and you miss the interactions between different parts of a bigger system. So for example, in biology, they use the same sort of databases that we use in OnePlanet to model ecological systems. And what they find is that when you look at any one interaction in that ecosystem, it's less predictable than when you look at the ecosystem as a whole, okay? So things become very complicated when you look at, say, two relationships, you know, or one relationship between two entities in a big system. In a complex interconnected system, the whole system is easier to predict through some of the patterns, the key patterns and processes in that system. By the way, I can send you a reading list if anyone's interested, which contains some of these videos. I've just collected a few of these little gems of videos, and this one is called Complex, Not Complicated. So that, in fact, for example, in rewilding, there are about 5 key processes which you replicate to create a healthy ecosystem. So you need the large herbivores, for example, the predators to eat those herbivores. Then you need the sort of pigs in there to churn up the land. Anyway, I think there are about 5 processes. You can, once you understand those key processes, you can actually predict and you can influence that system in the way you want it to go much more effectively. So with OnePlanet as well, our idea is that when you can see the big picture, things become a lot less complicated. And I'm going to say 3 orders of magnitude less complicated. And it becomes much easier to solve our problems by looking at the big picture than it is by trying to dive into the detail. And for us, that means identifying the shared outcomes we want to achieve and then collaborating around those shared outcomes. And in fact, not much could be simpler. So if everything is interconnected, we shouldn't see any discipline, any profession in a silo. We have all got something to offer, and can we all bring our relative skills, our judgment, our knowledge of the detail into actually applying those in a joined up way to achieve the shared outcomes that we need. So absolutely everyone can contribute to this because everything is interconnected. So sustainability is not just for environmentalists or or for geographers. It's for absolutely every one of us, and every one of us can influence that system, or all of us do influence that system. Now, if we can do that in a joined up way, I think there's a good chance that we can transform our systems to enable us to turn ourselves from a consumer species. I mean, we have consumed half of all living matter on the planet in the last 300 years. So the planet is literally half as alive as it used to be 300 years ago. Can we turn ourselves from a consumer species into a regenerator species? And can we do that within 10 years? That's what we are looking at, setting ourselves as a target at OnePlanet, to turn ourselves from a consumer species to a regenerator species, regenerate the living systems on which we depend within 10 years. And just one more thing I want to say is that in computing, there are two fundamentally different types of database structures. The sort of cellular databases, rows and columns databases like Excel spreadsheets, SQL type databases, and there are what technically known as graph databases or network databases. And in the very early days of computing, there was a battle between these two types of database. And the rows and columns won, unfortunately. And now these graph databases, these network databases are growing. And I think we're one of the first applications. I think we may have been the first to actually start applying these network databases, graph databases, to solving the complex interconnected problems of sustainability. So this fundamental difference between left-right hemisphere seems to be reflected fundamentally in computers as well, because of course we can't separate the way we see the world from the way we build our computers as well, and the way we manage information. So that's where I would like to stop, but I'm very happy to take any questions and stay on for another 10-15 minutes if anyone would like to. Otherwise, thanks so much for coming today, and don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can on LinkedIn, or email me, purin.desai at oneplanet.com, and absolutely I'll make time to answer your questions or hop on a call and chat about anything that you might want to chat about. Oh, I saw, there's the chat, isn't there? There's some people put some things in the chat. If everyone here, I'll circulate my reading list. It's about 4 pages long, and so don't look at it. You don't have to look at it all, but you might, some things in there you might find, yeah, that's what I want to look at. But it basically summarizes all the key influences particularly over the last 3 years that got me into this particular way of thinking and understanding what underpins the OnePlanet platform and the way we're working.
I just have a quick question, Purin, if it's all right. On your kind of data thoughts, some of the things that we're seeing now, so take like carbon, for example, it's an invisible gas to most people, so you can't actually see it being emitted. And I think if you could, then people would be much more aware of the damage that it does, both to the climate and to people in general. But so how much can that kind of narrative-based process work for systems that are either too large to be seen? So take the whole planet system entirely in itself, and for things that are non-perceivable without extra technology that then inevitably only produces a data set. And then how would you interpret that? But I completely agree that data is only as useful as the stories you tell around it when it comes to convincing people.
Yeah. That was George, wasn't it?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. No, I think that's it's a really good question. Now, this is where I think we have to make a leap of faith. Okay. So Ian McGilchrist and me now, if you ask us, or if you ask Ian, what is he? He'd say probably the closest I can come to is being a Taoist. Okay. And I would say that as well, because in Western traditions now, we have become we are influenced very heavily. And Alan Watts, if you listen to Alan Watts, if ever you can, he's on my list, but he's my absolute #1 hero in being able to really demystify mysticism and convert particularly Eastern philosophies into a language which like people like me brought up with a Western education can understand. So there is a fundamental assumption in Western culture, which goes all the way into most of science, which of course, but it doesn't go into quantum physics, but it goes into most of science, biology, chemistry, medical practice, which is that that the world is made up of parts, made up of things with empty space between them, and it's like a machine. That you can manage those different parts, and you can take the different parts apart. You can manage them separately. Now, in Taoism or Chinese culture, the universe. So whereas in the Western world we see the universe as a machine, in Chinese culture they see the universe as an organism. So it grows. It's got a mind of its own. George, this is where I've got really read up on this, is that actually the Tao, which is actually was the inspiration for the Force in Star Wars, there is a process which goes beyond any words that we can speak, which actually creates the universe, and that we can start aligning ourselves to the processes of the Tao, those processes of growth in the universe. I think you have to listen to someone as eloquent as Alan Watts to really communicate that. And I've got a couple of links in what I'll circulate around. So this idea that the universe has arisen out of chance, by chance, out of atoms and things, which are things which then by chance come together, when you think about it, is total tosh. When you look at the probabilities of that happening, they are so small. And then when you think about it, so small to have got to this stage, what's the probability of by chance it maintaining itself in the next second? And that's why physicists end up who try with that probabilities thing, they end up with things like, infinite numbers of universes to cope with the problem that actually the mathematics don't add up when we think about the universe as having come about by chance. So we have to then assume that there is purpose in the universe, which goes against, I would say, scientific orthodoxy at the moment. But absolutely, the top scientists do not believe that the universe has come about by chance. They believe there's purpose. And when we look at scientific methods, which actually say you start with the assumption that there's no purpose in the universe, and then you say, even things like in scientific papers, as Ian McGilchrist says, when you look at cells under the microscope, scientists will say they look as though they're behaving with purpose, and the simplest explanation by Occam's razor is that they do have purpose, because if they don't have purpose, you have to come up with ridiculously complicated, improbable, justifications or reasons or hypotheses for why they behave as though they appear to have purpose. So this is the massive transformation in culture and our assumptions of how to deal with reality, which we have to go to. And it took me 3 years to go through that process, incredibly painful process. It almost gives you a nervous breakdown to try and understand this. But on the other side, you just see the world as totally joyful, and the universe is totally, unfolding like an organism, growing like an organism. And if you align yourselves with that, you actually things become much easier. And it's made my life 1,000 times easier. And sometimes it does feel as though I've got the force flowing through me. Sometimes I don't want to sound too wacky about this, but I think less and I just feel more. And that's been in all traditions. It's in Christian mysticism, it's in Sufi mysticism, and it's called mysticism, but actually that is closer to being in contact with reality than any model, any intellectualization you could have. And As Alan Watts puts it, actually, we talk about mysticism, but in fact, the mystical experience is a deep ecological experience. It's an understanding of the interconnectedness of the world, which is fundamentally a deeper understanding of the world than any model, any mechanical model, any Newtonian model of the view of the universe can be.
Yeah, I think the only thought that I kind of came into my head were that I could offer as a counter to that, just being devil's advocate, would be that if we are here by chance, the infinite or near infinite amount of other universes that also would have then been created, we wouldn't be there, and therefore by us being here to make that kind of realization that we are here, necessarily, it means that we have to be here in order to be able to make that observation that we are here. So if we weren't here, we wouldn't make the observation.
Yeah, no, I think George, absolutely, and this is beyond my real ability to communicate or justify. So but I think it's, it's to postulate that there are an infinite number of universes. That's just it's just a way of explaining it, and there might be other simpler ways of explaining things, and more useful ways of explaining things. So it's very interesting. But I think we are going through what would to get this transformation that we need. We'll have to move on from reductionist science, and that's not to abandon it, but it's just to recognize its limitations. And I do believe that to create the world that we need, it will be what amounts to a spiritual revolution. And I don't think, and that's becoming less and less woo-woo. And more scientists are saying this, whether it's, the leading medical scientists, leading biologists, leading physicists. So I think we're in that process of really, as a culture, going through a point where we realize actually we didn't have a deep enough understanding of the nature of reality. We assumed what we learnt in a more superficial way, and gave us some great powers in certain things, actually gave us lots of, has resulted with massive problems for us now, and that we have to dig deeper, go deeper, and see the world in a different way. But actually, having said all that, I don't think you need any of this philosophy in order just to use OnePlanet and just to start saying, these are the sorts of things we want to achieve. This is how they fit together, and these are the actions we can take. So I think none of this, you don't even need to accept any of this. It's, going back to Buckminster Fuller's quote, is just use the tool, and if it's a useful tool, it will help us sort stuff out. It will lead to different ways of thinking, different understanding. We don't have to talk about the metaphysics. So I have put this separately for those, who are interested in what might be the metaphysical and neuroscientific basis for why OnePlanet might actually be a very powerful tool to help us transform rapidly in the way that we need to transform.
Yeah, great.
Good. I think we should probably call it a day there, but please do, any of you, if you've got any questions, I'm very happy, hop on if any of you even want to chat for half an hour or so, I can do that. I'll just leave one. I just saw one question there. Does the notion that we learn, Purin, does that dispel the notion that we learn from the past to shape the future? I would say yes. We don't shape the future by learning from the past. We actually shape the future by imagining the future, which is a very different process. But yes, definitely we can learn from the past. but that isn't how we create the future. It's just one bit of information which we can use to help unlock our imagination for what the future might be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. I'll send around my reading list. One day I'll get around to shortening it a bit. It's a bit it's slightly messy, but I don't have time to do that now. But I'll send it around, and if any of you, as I say, if any of you want to reach out to me, please do. Or yeah, would love to hear any feedback that you may have as well. Okay, so thank you all very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Great session. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.